So in this video, I want to talk about the blocking pass of the ANO2 assignment, the weight shift step over. So here is my blocking pass, which I'll just play for you now quickly. And in this video, instead of going through a step-by-step tutorial, I wanted to film a time lapse, and I'll talk over the time lapse, explaining my thought processes and what I'm doing as you watch the video. If you want to see a full real-time speed of this video, you can set your YouTube speed to 0.25 and it should be perfect real-time playback. If there's any questions, please let me know, but otherwise enjoy the video and I hope it helps. Okay, so here we are in Maya, and you can see that I'm really working on my first pose. Your first pose is really important because of course it does set the foundation for where you're going and how the shot starts. So you should spend a good 30 minutes on your first pose, especially if it's a really big acting shot with lots of attitude and personality. In this assignment, I've definitely rushed it slightly because I'm trying to get through the work and I want to just practice on the workflow. But even so, you'll see this is my sort of most thorough pose in this very first pass. Now sadly my reference, I didn't film my right arm or the screen left arm, which was a problem, so I should have filmed this reference better. However, luckily I do manage to find something that works. Now I do set up my shots, so I work on 8s normally, so I'll spend, every 8 frames I'll spend a good time making a pose. But I do quite a quick and rough pass of everything on the 8s, and then I'll go back and break it down to 4s, and if needed, some sections I need to go to 2s, which you'll see later. However, I do think that some shots require different workflow, and this isn't the only way I work. Sometimes I might do a layered approach, and I may focus on one curve and one controller and get it really working quite nicely. And sometimes I will stick to more straight ahead, going on 2s the whole way through. But I have found that for my speed and being as quick as possible, getting a really quick overview of the shot on 8s allows me to go back and make really quick changes to the poses, the timing, and all of the individual curves. So 8s is how I set up my shots. It's so fast and it's just really good to see what your shot will look like. And you get it in front of the director and show them what you're doing, and you get feedback early. And feedback is really important, especially when working with directors and people who are in control of the work above you in the pipeline. And they can give you feedback quickly so you can make adjustments quickly. Now another thing you may notice is I'm working with AutoSpline turned on. And if your PC is quick enough for this, I think it's really useful. Because an issue I've seen is the way that people understand the terms blocking, splining and polishing. And I think it's slightly confusing when I ask students if they've seen their shot in Spline and they say no. And I don't understand why you wouldn't use the software or use the technology to have a look at what your shot looks like in its final sort of speed, I should say. Blocking is really, really deceptive. If you block out something on 4s, it might look quite snappy and quite fast, but you'll be missing poses and you'll be missing the key timing information that your eyes can't quite pick up on until you see this in Spline. So I'm constantly scrubbing through my timeline, as you can see, to see if the poses feel natural and if they feel like they're flowing between one another. But however, even if I do block in this AutoSpline mode, I will always be showing my work in stepped. The reason for this is blocked mode is a storytelling mode. You're telling the audience or your director the main poses and the main story that's going on, and they can give you feedback on the actual layout, the composition, and the beats of the shot. if you submit something which is in rough spline, you're going to get a very confusing set of feedback notes, which say like, oh, fix this leg, or this blink is wrong, or maybe his eye dart is not working. But really, you're still focusing on the cog and getting the body mechanics working. So if you want to get actual feedback on your shot and the story, always submit in stepped. So you'll see near the end of this blocking pass, I go back, make sure everything is keyed on every single 8s or 4s, so I can make a really clean and stepped play blast. So the other thing you might realize is that I'm definitely working with the cog quite a lot from the start. So in this very first pass, I haven't opened the graph editor yet, but you'll see very soon I open up the graph editor and really try to clean up that blocking pass. And this is another thing I think people get confused by. They see the word blocking and they think, oh, that's rough animation. Your blocking should be pretty good. Your blocking should almost be polished if done correctly, especially for some of those really big curves. Like I'm looking now at my sort of cog and I'm going to see, okay, this looks a bit rough. Let's see how I can adjust this. So I start adjusting some of the translate X's. I still think this is blocking. I don't call this splining because I'm not really splining the shot and pushing extremes. I'm not trying to make massive timing changes yet. I'm trying to get the flow of the poses and the flow of the shot. And you can see here that I also use the motion trails quite a lot in blocking. Motion trails, especially for arcs, really help you understand the flow of the shot, as I said. And it's something that people say to me is cheating, or it's not, you don't need it until polished to polish the arcs. But like I said, polished animation should be done in blocking. And polishing, I think, is more of a cleanup and also adding those nuggets or cherries on top. It's not about making your animation work. Your animation should work from blocking. So really make sure that when you're going through your blocking pass, you're really checking those arcs, checking the spacing, you're checking how your sort of mechanics are working. So now I've blocked out on 8s mostly. I'm going in and adding my poses. At this stage, I do slightly lose focus sometimes, and I kind of... So at this stage, you could show this to a director, and you can see that the shot does work. There is... the poses are there, and it's clear what the story of the shot is. So if you're looking for acting notes or composition notes, this is a good time to submit your work. And if you wanted to join the dailies, this would be something I could definitely give feedback on. But like I said, the mechanics aren't there yet. The mechanics are really rough. The body is moving sort of very statically. So now I'm going to go in and start breaking down some of those movements. So I'm still blocking here. Like I may be adjusting the curves, but I'm still blocking because I wanted to make sure that those rotations are already kind of built into the blocking. So some people, they say that you must, or you can, take all your curves and you can just select everything and shift them 2 keys or shift them 4 keys to get overlap. And that does work for maybe like a tail sometimes, but for the body, that really doesn't work because there's so many small adjustments being made, and you want to have real control over where your overlap is. So I build this overlap in from the very start of my blocking. So you can see here, this is why I have the view on the left hand side for the graph editor. It makes it so easy to just go in and check which curves are offsetting where the extremes are for my individual chest controllers. And it's never going to be a perfect offset, but it does help me get a starting point so I know where I should be sort of adjusting from. But like I said, this can be changed later, and it can be adjusted at any time. And that's another reason why I really think this workflow works, because I'm still keeping things all locked down on the same key, and I can make timing changes, curve changes, really quickly. The only downside is you can see I'm doing a lot of adjustment of curves, so it does take a little bit of time to make these curves flow Whereas a layered approach, if you were just keying the extremes of movement, would be 2 keys, one for the up, one for the down. That workflow is quicker. However, I really don't think you have the same level of control unless you're really, really aware of what you're doing. So this is why I prefer to do the spline blocking, as I say, because you have control, you have accuracy, but you also have speed. And again, my setup, my hotkeys, and my layout is what makes this so fast for me, because I really can just spend all my time blocking with no real issues with, the UI or preferences. But you can tell I really do spend a good amount of time on these curves. Like, this is a good half an hour just on this one set of curves on this rotate X. Sorry, the rotate Z. But it's really important. For this movement especially, I'm moving side to side. I really want to make sure that side overlap is built in. So now I'm breaking it down even further, going to 2s. This section I feel does need a bit of care and love. There's lots of moving parts. And while on maybe some curves I've put way too many keys, and the splining and the curves may look slightly soft, at this stage, again, I want to have control. I want to make sure that everything is working well. And while I may be working in the graph editor, I'm still making sure that my posing looks good. Like, I don't want my poses to look bad, even if it looks smooth in the graph editor. To make sure you're always checking the viewport. And sometimes I'm barely looking at the graph editor. I have the sort of muscle memory down. I know what keys I'm on, what I'm doing. So I know that I can just look at the viewport and make those changes in the graph editor. Because I'm really focusing on the graph editor. Sorry, I'm really focusing on the viewport. So this stage, I'm now moving away from the rotate Z. You don't want to get too stuck on one location because everything is related, right? So I've done a lot of work on the rotate Z. Let's now focus on some other controllers of the cog, and I can go back and forth between them. And you'll see I'm really not happy with this translate X, so I'm trying new things. It takes me to near the end of my blocking pass to really get something I'm happy with. But I do change it a lot during this shot. And my reference is also really important. My reference is there, and I am definitely not following it one-to-one. I'm not rotoscoping as much, but I am using it a lot to see where the weight's going, where the momentum is going in the arms, the head movements as well. They're really nice, and especially for your initial weight transfer blocking pass, you do want to see what you're doing in your reference. As I keep blocking more and more, I'm definitely using my reference less and less. But if it wasn't there, this shot would be 10 times slower and 10 times harder. Another good trick you can see there, if I don't like the curve itself, I just delete the keys and let my in between for me, and then I can rekey them again. It is important to rekey them, for me at least, because again, I do want to keep that control later on. So as you can see, I'm going back and forth, still really working on the cog and the chest. It's really important, like I said, to get this working first. And again, I'm deleting some keys, letting Maya in between for me, and then I'm rekeying them again just to maintain that control. It's lots of repetition, and it does take some practice, but you'll see that when possible, I'm just trying to save myself time and let Maya do the work for me. But even in this blocking pass, I want to maintain some really smooth curves. And that bouncing board assignment you do in class 1, those rules apply to every single controller, every single sort of key, and you want to maintain that ease in, ease out. And later on, when you start to spline it and polish it, you can start pushing these curves more. And at this point, the arm, I wasn't happy with the arm, so I was trying to fix this a bit. And I went away from my reference for my first sort of arm pass. And as you'll see later on, I really stick to the reference more and more. I wasn't happy with what I did. And this is a really good example of when maybe I tried something new without referencing and without planning, and it didn't work, it backfired. So I wasted time blocking out the arm. I'm now having to redo it all completely. And also another thing I'm probably doing wrong here is my reference is completely hidden. And even if I am trying to guess and work things out by myself, having it visible, yeah, should be better. And right now I realise that. So I start moving it back to the whole screen. And now I'm making sure everything's keyed correctly, going through my entire shot. Because sometimes when you're blocking this way, there might be frames missing on certain keyframes. So for example, I've blocked out the cog, the chest, and the neck, but my shoulder and arm have not been keyed. This makes it harder to sort of do a stepped play blast, and you want to make sure you do check that from time to time. So I've then shortened down the timeline to just 35 frames, and definitely working in sections can help you here, because you want to make sure that you're focusing and refining the curves on sort of small details first and moving on. It's a lot more simple and a lot easier to handle if you break it down into sections. I'm working on the arm again. Again, looking from the side, looking from the front, because it looked quite good from the front, but I realised from the side the arms are way too far forward. And it does make a difference, and it is noticeable. However, I'm not really focusing on the wrists or the fingers yet. I haven't even keyed the fingers, as you can tell. I've just set them to 0, 0, 0 and left them at that. Things like the fingers and that sort of overlap, I definitely wait until late spline and early polish. There's no point focusing on things like fingers and tails and hair when the mechanics aren't working. So don't worry about the fingers. It can be done later. But here I'm refining the pose. I want to make sure that the hand is clear of the chest. So any frame where the fingers or the elbow or the arm is like tangenting with the body or the leg, you want to try and avoid that. Sometimes it's impossible, but you do want to try it when possible to keep a nice clean posing through all of your frames. So I add some more frames to my timeline, just 10 more frames to see where the arm's going through. It's definitely a very back and forth process. And I might do the arms for a bit, go back to the cog. You're building in layers of animation and you're building in like the structure. But as you go, you realize things have to be, changed. So don't set yourself up for failure by sticking to just one pose and then never changing it. And please also be comfortable with deleting poses, especially when you're doing maybe your key poses at the start of your shot. If your pose isn't reading, but you've already blocked out, let's say, 50 frames, please go back and just delete things and just redo them completely from scratch. You'll save time in the long run. Especially when I was in class 3 and class 4, I would try to edit and change poses, and it would just be a nightmare trying to fix things because it was fundamentally broken. So just make sure that if you do make changes, don't be afraid to delete like a whole pose or even a whole section. And if you get notes from your mentor or something where they want a massive arm change or a massive head change, or the accents need to be shifted differently, if you can do it with small changes, that's great. But again, if you have to delete 10 frames, just delete those frames, redo it, and you'll save yourself some time. So these arms are still quite rough, but I want to try and get the curve to be smoother and make sure that nothing is broken, even at this stage. I think looking back at this video, the shoulders could have some work done to them. But the final play blast for this video, which is my blocking pass, I would say, is definitely very, very rough. It does need a lot of polish, a lot of refinement. And while the cog may be working quite well, it doesn't mean that I can just call it a day and spline it. If I hit AutoSpline and then submit the work, I'm selling myself short. So now you see these lines are all flat, which is in the rotation, which isn't always bad. Like sometimes they are flat, but I just want a little bit of movement there, especially in the upper chest. I'm just trying to get a little bit of rotations in there for the back and forth. Because for the good first half of this blocking, I wasn't happy with the way the character settled. I felt like he was sort of abruptly stopping, and there was too much of a angle shift in his body. He was standing upright and then he was just being stationary. So here I'm reducing the amount of rotation, and I'm trying to make it more of an ease in. Again, I'm doing this from the side. This is a rotation X, so this is a side, so back and forth movement. So looking from the side is really important. And I realize the feet also in this section. While I do focus on the feet more when I'm splining, you need to have the rough spacing of the feet correct. So this placement is way too soft. So I'm making sure that I do have a little bit more of a impact on the feet. And then also having this translate X sort of rotate back and overshoot, which doesn't happen in my assignment. But I think sometimes you have to make sacrifices and make changes. And I think to sell the weight shift, I have to have an overshoot and settle. So these are these animation principles that are really important. Again, back to the cog, making adjustments. I'm never happy with the cog. In all my shots, I always feel the cog could be improved. But if the cog is slightly wrong, you'll find problems down the line. I think in a second I actually change, or I do undo, undo everything here. I didn't like any of it, so I went back to the original. One thing I always felt that other people do, which I was really jealous of, is they block out their shot, they hit spline, they refine their curves, and then they polish. And that isn't really how things work though, because as you can see, I'm always having to make changes. I'm fighting the curves. I'm really struggling to get something I like. And I assumed that I was a bad animator for having to redo things and make changes. But that's just the case of every animator. You're always making changes, you're always refining, and you always find issues with your animation. But as you can see, I really haven't done much to the fingers, the feet, the toes, even the neck and head are kind of slightly neglected here. And it's really fast to get this sort of blocking done. But the one thing also to remember throughout this whole thing is I'm always aware of where the weight is. So where the force is coming from and where the weight is going to. Which really helps with blocking out and animating, because if you can just understand that everything has force and inertia and how that affects the things around it, it will really help you understand how things move. So for my class 2 assignment, I did a man blowing in the wind, or it was Stella blowing in the wind. And that was a really hard shot, but it really had to make me think about the way forces affect things. And I think that single shot was the biggest benefit and help to my animation journey, because by understanding where things are going and how things are affected by the wind, by gravity, by any force, you can then understand body mechanics to a deeper level. So finally, this left arm, or screen left arm, was really annoying me. I had to fix this. It was catching my eye too much, and I had to sort of make some changes. So again, I'm trying to stick to my reference here for the end, because this is where the arm is visible. So I'm kind of working backwards in a way, trying to guess where the arm would be, which is the wrong thing. I should have filmed a better reference and changed my camera. This ending I felt was really confusing, because there was a nice little bounce on the hips with my hand, and I couldn't quite capture that, and it was a little bit frustrating. But again, in polish I can definitely work on it more, and when I'm splining I can sort of play with those curves more. But even the initial blocking pass, I want to get pretty far, close to perfect. But I think this took me a good 20 minutes, just this one little 15-20 frame section. So I'm making sure the right arm and left arm are all in sync. So I'm adding in my drag. You see that the left or the screen left arm is dragging a little bit. You want to try and offset things with their spacing, so that the chest is obviously dragging behind the hips, the arm drags behind the chest, and the head also drags behind the chest slightly in this movement. But some movements, of course, it can be inverted. Sometimes the head is the first movement, sometimes the hands move first. It does depend on the action, but in this action the hips are very clearly the driving force, so that's what I'm using as my initial point of reference. Again, fixing curves. Again, this is definitely blocking. I would not consider this splining for my workflow. This is my blocking pass. So these flat curves, this is bad. This is when I've basically keyed things on the relevant key, so on 4, so frame 21, frame 25, 29, etc. But I haven't done movement on those curves, which is bad, especially for the arms or for limbs. Unless they're stuck to something, like stuck down on a table. If there's any movement in their hips, like you're walking or jumping or anything, there will always be movement on other body parts. So whenever you make a key or make a blocking pose, you always want to make sure everything has some movement. Now don't over animate and make everything, run around or flail around like a crazy person. But if it's completely still, then the audience will definitely notice that. So you want to make sure there's something. Even if they can't see it, they can feel it. That's the thing we're going for here. Now you may see that there's Animbot at the bottom of my screen, the plugin. Please be aware I'm not using Animbot though. But anything I've done in this video has been all with the default Maya. And even right now, I've used none of my plugins, even the ones that I talked about in my previous video. At this stage, I don't need any of them. I'm just using default Maya and default work. Okay, that was the blocking pass. Hopefully it made sense and is useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me on the campus or in the YouTube comments, and I will be getting back to the polish pass and the spline pass in the next couple of days. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye bye.